Welcome to the College of Complexes. My name is Tim. I'd like to welcome everybody tonight to our illustrious College of Complexes meeting. The College of Complexes consists of the following format. One, the first rule is we have one fool at a time. Second is no personal attacks. The college consists of the following format. First, there's a brief announcements period. Then there is our speaker will speak, followed by a question and answer period, and then followed by our infamous rebuttal period. We'll finish up about 7:45 because the restaurant closes at 8. I am your host, Tim, and I guess I'll welcome you tonight. I'll make a speaker introduction after the announcements. All right, Jeremy, go ahead.
Okay, welcome everyone to meeting number 3,802 of the College of Complexes, the playground for people who think. Now, we maintain several email lists. There can use information on the main page of the website or contact me in order to get on one of these. Okay, although I am not a capitalist, I will give an advertisement for our upcoming programs. On February the 1st, we got 6 of them. February the 1st, D. Knight, author of books on activism, will be returning and reporting on the nation of China, which he visited on a trip, a delegation. On February the 8th, newcomer to the college, Walt Sacklow, a veteran of the peace movement, will give a lecture on are we in an era, ERA, era of perpetual war. On February the 15th, Dan Waterstadt will be returning, college regular, to talk about nature and eating natural foods. He says, do everything according to nature. On February the 22nd, Eric Mao will be returning, and he will be asking the question, does the United States have a national character? What is the national character of our country? Okay, that leaves open in March. We've got 3 dates, March 1, 8, 29. If you'd like to speak, I'll need a written title and description of your narrative to look over. On March the 15th, then, Reverend George from the East Coast will be visiting us and telling us how she has launched a mother's movement, or wants to launch a mother's movement. Recommend you check out the website. Links are provided. She's got a mother's movement. On March the 22nd, we will have an open microphone. We already have 3 keynote speakers to get the discussion going, but the question will be, what can you do today to make the world a better place? And everybody will give in a few minutes to come to the podium and tell us what is your recommendation. Okay, let's go. If anyone has an announcement of a date and time of an event around town for the activist community, now is the period. Thank you.
All right, Dan, go ahead.
Hello, testing. Okay, do you have a sugar problem? No?
No.
Good. Okay, do
No,
you
not at
eat
all.
cake, cookies, candy, sweet muffins, or Coke or Pepsi? Well,
Not
I
enough.
have the.
All I can get.
I am not a doctor. Charlie wants me to say I am not a doctor, so I'll say that. I'm not a doctor. I didn't go to medical school, but I read the book on my table over there called Fat Chance by a doctor. He said, Sugar is a problem in America today. Sugar is a problem in the world today. So if you eat cake, cookies, and candy and muffins, and you drink Coke and Pepsi, I can help, even though I'm not a doctor. I have been there. I had a difficult time stopping this sugar addiction. So using sugar as a crutch, using sugar as for cheap energy, using sugar for feeling good, ask me, guaranteed. Thank you.
All right. Okay, go ahead.
I'm not a doctor either, and I can definitely corroborate what Daniel just said. I read the book Sugar Blues years ago and got myself off of sugar. And if I eat sugar now, I get sick because I call this sickness craving for food. And if I eat sugar, then I crave food all day long the next day. And that's a kind of sickness. Okay, my real announcement is, and I'll give you one of these flyers unless you already have one, is that this coming Thursday, January 30th at 7 p.m., the Nuclear Energy Information Service is having its monthly program called Night with the Experts. And our expert this Thursday is a very, very young woman. As I look over this crowd, she's 30 if she's a day. And her name is Emily Strasser. She's the author of a book called Half-Life of a Secret and Reckoning with a Hidden History. She grew up in Nashville and spent her summers in Oak Ridge. Her grandfather worked on the bomb, and after the bomb exploded twice, once in Hiroshima and once in Nagasaki, he worked on the nuclear arsenal. The family was never allowed to know what he was doing, and it's been a mystery that she was motivated to research. She did a fabulous job of researching this problem, and she wrote a book on her and her family's experience. So I'm going to pass out these flyers. I passed them out last time. I've only got 20. Looks like it'll about cover. And so please, if you don't want one, don't take one. But if you do, please do. And you can, my email, oops, my email's not on here. Oh my goodness. I printed the wrong one. Oh my goodness. My email is my name, Jan Budar, the numeral 1 at gmail.com. It's easy. My last name is Boudart, and I've got to watch it because I printed out the wrong flyer. It doesn't have my email on it. You can email me to get a registration link. You have to register to come.
Okay, next, please. Next announcer.
I'll make the next announcement. This will be quick. There's 2 websites that have current information that you might want to, breaking news this week. Greg Palace's site has published the report about how voter suppression installed Trump. There was voter suppression in 43 states, and Pennsylvania, Georgia, Michigan, and Wisconsin were all massively suppressed so that they could install Trump, number 1. Number 2, the Want to Know info site has an updated, the first article on that site. Come see me later at the back. We'll have a bunch of books later. There's an updated article about Smedley Butler and how he blew the whistle on the war machine back then. War is a racket. It's a really good article. It's understandable about where we are with the military industrial complex and what we have to do. And during my 5-minute rebuttal tonight, I'm going to be giving a quick book report on these 3 books. 9/11 Revisited by David Ray Griffin. What the Nurses Saw by Ken McCarthy. It's about recent, what happened in the hospitals with COVID. And this book is recent, called The Medical Pharmaceutical Killing Machine, What the Drug Companies Are Doing. So I'll be sitting in the back later after my rebuttal. So if anybody wants to come back and peruse these books or any of the others, that are reality-based, feel free to come talk to me. Thank you.
Anybody else? Go ahead.
My announcement is that the Gulf of Mexico is no more. It is now the Gulf of America per Trump's executive order. Love that man. Voter suppression, that's more of a Democrat game than a Republican game, but I'm sure Republicans do it too, but probably not nearly as bad as what happened in 2020, the election that was stolen from Donald Trump. So, you know, Andy, I think you're focused on the wrong target. Okay, that's it.
All right, go ahead.
I have to tell you what the Onion said about changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America. In the Onion, the guy says, this is going to confuse a lot of fish.
All right, let's get to our speaker, please.
All right. Seeing that there's no more announcements left, I want to introduce our speaker tonight, and that's Dr. Robert Holland. I think I got it correctly. The speaker states that human society is marked by continuous discontentedness with the conditions of everyday life. When dissatisfactions peak, movements arise that propose to either restore the past or progress rapidly to the next phase. Multiple doomsday scenarios identified over the course of the 20th and 21st centuries now cause many to repudiate the Enlightenment and seek to dismantle its cultural inheritance. The engaging Counter Enlightenment signals a shift in deep culture as human history leaves behind the modern period. Let's welcome Robert Holland. Sorry.
Glad to see everyone. I was a little surprised to hear the first rebuttal to the announcements. I want to point out that when I went on the schedule, Chuck chose some images that might have misled people into believing that my speech is about political discontent. And although that's part of the package, this is really more about cultural shifts in mentality. He had images of Trump supporters in particular, or dissenters against Trump, but I provided him with these 4 images that I thought were better suited to my speech. Those images are still up on the website as of this morning. I think they'll probably go down as we progress into February, but I invite you to have a close look at those if you want to pull them up on your phone at some point. Because human society never reaches utopia that allows for self-satisfied stasis, thinkers refine and innovate with the expectation of continuous progress toward an unattainable perfection. There is ebb and flow to those efforts, with some periods being quite turbulent. The most recent period of widespread, sustained cultural turmoil in the United States was arguably the 1960s and 70s, during the heyday of the hippie counterculture, the civil rights movement, Vietnam War protests, and the second phase of feminism following suffrage in the early part of the 20th century. Subsequent to that turmoil, rights for women and minorities were consolidated. The US lost the Vietnam War, and the middle class was at its peak in terms of earning power following more than 2 decades of economic expansion. Hippies aged, were absorbed into the mainstream, and became today's maligned boomers. One might have thought things would calm down, and perhaps they did somewhat, but the oil crisis and stagflation followed quickly. I collected several quotes from disparate times to demonstrate the persistence of discontent, but of interest, I will only read one. The handout that was provided to each of you has the whole collection of discontentedness quotes that I had intended to read, but I'll limit myself to this one from Peter Beagle in his 1973 introduction to republication of Tolkien's Hobbit. Here I quote, "I've never thought it an accident that Tolkien's works waited more than 10 years to explode into popularity almost overnight. The 60s were no fouler a decade than the 50s. They merely reaped the 50s foul harvest. But they were the years when millions of people grew aware that industrial society had become paradoxically unlivable, incalculably immoral, and ultimately deadly. In terms of passwords, the 60s were the time when the word progress lost its ancient holiness and escape stopped being comically obscene. The impulse is being called reactionary now, but lovers of Middle Earth want to go there. I myself would like a shot." That's the end of the quote. This yearning for identification with a grand project plots at the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, not at the survival tier at the bottom. In contrast, today's mainstream ambitions are fixated on the extreme wealth of Humvee billionaires, not exactly an admirable goal or aspirational figures. This reversion to base desires is part of the ever-changing cultural paradigm, which abandoned social contracts in favor of dog-eat-dog competition that is also a race to the bottom. As I consider the current day, I surmise that the modern period is nearly over, and accordingly, Western culture has turned sharply away from the Enlightenment. As with each of the speeches, this is now the 13th, that I give before the college, I became aware of numerous books on the same subject, which include these titles: Critics of the Enlightenment by Christopher Bloom, Enemies of the Enlightenment, The French Counter Enlightenment and the Making of Modernity by Darren McMahon, The Dialectic of Counter Enlightenment by Christian Thorne, The Evangelical Counter Enlightenment from Ecstasy to Fundamentalism in Christianity, Judaism, and Islam in the 18th Century by William Everdell, and lastly, The Great Regression, a collection of essays edited by Heinrich Geiselberger. Those are just the books. As I look around, it's like when you buy a new car and you see everybody else driving the same model of car that you just bought. Well, now I'm finding everybody's writing about this in one guise or another. I see it all the time in news reports, in blogs, on Substacks, everywhere. It's coming up all the time. So let me begin by defining a couple of terms. First, the modern period, and then the Enlightenment. The modern period has a number of nested subcategories inside of it. So it's not a sequence, but rather a complex, if you will. The modern period commences in the early 16th century, after the Middle Ages, after the discovery of the New World, and after the Renaissance, and is characterized by the expansion of cities, the rise of mercantilism, colonialism, and the early scientific period, notably the acceptance of heliocentrism that disputes humanity's position at the center of the universe. The two inventions that launched this phase of history are the mechanical clock, which regimented the hours of the day, and the printing press, which enabled public literacy and a cultural shift away from orality. The Age of Enlightenment begins in the 18th century with numerous political revolutions, overthrowing monarchies, the development of self-rule, and growth of scientific thinking. The late modern period, roughly the past 225 years, saw rapid growth of mechanization and industrialization. Three networks, energy, transportation, and communications, developed gradually and transformed the Earth's surface. That's how we live now, reliant on resources and information transiting the globe. Modern technologies and the spread of capitalism during the Industrial Revolution have finally absorbed regional cultures and societies into a planetary industrial civilization. Among the most significant changes stemming from globalization over the past 40 or 50 years is loss of economic sovereignty. Countries are now wholly interdependent, in ways the World Economic Forum hopes will emerge as a one world government, aka the Great Reset. This definition of the modern period, I warrant, is sociological in character rather than being based on war making and empire building, though those activities may be how history is primarily told and understood. With each new step forward in sophistication and power, the masses have grown aware of risks that before were either less acute or less well recognized. In his book, The Consequences of Modernity from 1991, sociologist Anthony Giddens identifies and discusses 7 categories of risk associated with the late modern period. I can't go into them, but I will list them for you. Globalization of risk in terms of intensity, globalization of risk in terms of frequency, environmental risk, institutionalized risk, knowledge gaps and uncertainty, collective or shared risk, and limitations of expertise. Which risk category represents the most potent specter looming over humanity is a matter of debate, but the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists currently has its doomsday clock set to 90 seconds until midnight, its closest interval ever to the apocalypse. Accordingly, the public mood, or the zeitgeist, points both backwards and forwards, seeking escape or deliverance from modernity. Regarding the Enlightenment, debate continues over this question. Is Europe, Western Europe that is, and its offshoots, including the US, a project of Christendom, a child of Roman law and empire, an outgrowth of Greek rationality and democratic values, the result of Renaissance humanism and secularism, or about philosophies of universalism and cosmopolitanism?
All of the above. That's right.
Indeed, these options are not mutually exclusive. In the public realm, the term liberal democracy, I said public, I think I meant political. In the political realm, the term liberal democracy refers to values to which we all used to aspire and adhere. However, I prefer not to use the term liberalism because its working meaning has been distorted beyond recognition and usefulness. Westerners are inheritors of a bundle of ideas, social values, and modes of thought that have driven history for roughly 400 years. They include, in no particular order, the elevation of reason and moral conscience over emotion, democratic systems of self-rule requiring due process, deliberation, and political patience, free speech and debate as indispensable tools for resolving conflict and achieving compromise and consensus, and finally, the emphasis on the rights-bearing individual, each equal before the law. Admittedly, their application over time and place has been highly variable. Still, the importance of these last two, free speech and individual rights, both of which carry responsibilities, cannot be overstated. The Bill of Rights, the first 14 amendments to the US Constitution, enumerates rights possessed by citizens and specifically restrains government from infringing those rights. Setbacks include the 2012 National Defense Authorization Act signed by Barack Obama, which authorizes indefinite military detention of US citizens without the benefit of counsel or due process. Possible results include life imprisonment and torture, handily ending the doctrine of habeas corpus. In addition, and in violation of the Fourth Amendment, guaranteeing security in their persons, papers, and effects against unreasonable seizures, generally understood more as privacy rights, Section 702 of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 1978, the FISA Act, is now being reinterpreted to allow for warrantless surveillance of Americans. Because of the ease and ubiquity of communications and transactions on the internet, most Americans already know their privacy is irrevocably gone. Jaded hipsters mock those of us who still demand privacy with the meme, "Let it go, man, it's already gone." Regarding free speech, which is a peculiarly American formulation and is not found elsewhere in the West, at least to the same degree, perhaps the most significant distortion of free speech rights was the 2010 Supreme Court decision in Citizens United versus Federal Election Commission, which extended the speech clause of the First Amendment to corporate entities. Corporations had formerly been given personhood, in scare quotes, for the purpose of entering into contracts. This judicial interpretation opened the floodgates to undue influence in the elections by any entity with deep enough pockets. The term corporate capture applies here and harkens back to Eisenhower's naming the military-industrial complex as a threat. Release and review of the so-called Twitter files only a few years ago also evidenced the federal government's arm twisting of social media platforms to censor free speech and force onto the public narratives issuing from various health agencies regarding the COVID pandemic. Unlike privacy rights already lost in today's surveillance society, the battle over free speech is still being waged, perhaps because of history's lessons about propaganda, brainwashing, and cult programming that attempt to remove intellectual integrity and sovereignty. The most galling aspect of this battle is probably not flip-flopping by the likes of Elon Musk or Mark Zuckerberg, but the fact that many government representatives, elected congressmen, for example, sworn to uphold the US constitutions, are the very people pushing for censorship under bogus new designations, misinformation, disinformation, and malinformation. As time has passed, support for Enlightenment values and liberal democracy have been declining. Analyses of the causes and manifestations of decline range all over the map, but typically include a combination of incompetence, exhaustion, and inevitability. In short, civilizations run down and all eventually fall into the dustbin of history. Choose your point of inflection, I suppose, but mine is World War I, the first global conflict and the first mechanized war that enabled killing by the millions. In Northeast France, there's a region still existing today called Zone Rouge that is so damaged by that conflict and packed with unexploded ordnance, including gas shells, that it has been deemed unfit for human habitation and allowed to go feral. If Enlightenment philosophies and progressive ambitions had instilled notions of perpetual progress, especially in terms of what used to be called techniques, World War I represented a severe psychological break and brutal reminder of humanity's inability to reach moral maturity. The West has never recovered, says me. The hedonistic 1920s, the Great Depression, and the abominations of World War II only further demonstrate that assessment. My thesis, then, is that Enlightenment philosophies, institutions, and values are eroding, a breakdown arising out of deep culture and now manifesting in open attack. This phase of history has several aborted antecedents. For example, the European artistic and intellectual movement known as Romanticism in the late 18th century was a rejection of rationalism and celebration of subjectivity and imagination. The US experienced a series of great awakenings in parallel with New England transcendentalism in the second half of the 19th century. Both of these incomplete gestures point backwards as conservative attempts to retain or regain values already being lost or supplanted. In contrast, traditional portraiture and landscape painting after 1850 or so disintegrated into ever greater distortion under the genres Impressionism, Cubism, Surrealism, and Abstract Expressionism. Anybody who can call to mind a portrait painted by Pablo Picasso in his Cubist period recognizes the distorted face of his figures. I can think of no better artistic rendering or illustration of a fractured psyche. Classical music did something similar with serialism. And in the internet era, the earthly, visible, concrete world has given way to hyperreality, extended reality, and virtuality, what now is sometimes called digital modernity. As everyone knows, nothing happens until it's displayed on a screen as a consumer project or product. These gestures both point forward where fractured people in meat world interact with fake people and AI projections. The ultimate goal is dematerialization of the human body as hotly desired by transhumanists, with consciousness uploaded to a hard drive where it can live forever, disembodied. So why is this happening? It's no one thing. In terms of politics, it's a loss of faith in human institutions to deliver on promises of a better life for each successive generation. In terms of spirituality, causes include secularization and denial of the sacredness of death. In terms of cultural conditioning, blame goes to the staggering decline in literacy, and with it, disappearance of habits of mind that come from deep engagement with print. People today primarily consume video, which is processed not through the language center of the rational mind, but instead processed emotionally. In terms of daily habits, interaction with elaborate red tape bureaucracies, such as the typical customer service line that purposely puts stumbling blocks in the way of speaking with a competent agent, or being forced onto screens at food kiosks or grocery self-checkout. Here I'll give a shout out to Dappers for not having gone over to digital menus that you access through a QR code that you scan with your phone. We still have paper menus here. Technology alienates individuals from each other. In terms of the information environment, it's the inability to make coherent sense of the world, a subject I want to explore more deeply here. Because of a maelstrom of marketing and advertising, garbage political discourse, which mostly boils down to racehorse politics, corporate capture, and government propaganda, all forms of narrative management, nearly everything one encounters must be tested against reality. Even worse, Capitulation of journalism and higher education to narrative managers and to ideology reveals their self-destruction and basic disservice to the public, resulting in disappearance of critical thinking needed to sort fact from fiction. I read a comment at Substack recently that reported on a fellow who had to retrain his mind over a period of time to perceive unfairness, injustice, and manipulation that had been obvious to him as a child. Responsibilities of adulthood had blocked, albeit temporarily, the finely tuned emotional intelligence and bullshit detector most young children possess. Regaining them allowed him to perceive the world more clearly. This fellow might be the exception to the rule, someone who still subscribes to the reality principle. For the great unwashed masses, a different lesson was learned when, after decades of denial, professional wrestling finally revealed that, yes, indeed, it's fake. The practice known as kayfabe portrays artificial stage rivalries between wrestlers and predetermined outcomes as real or genuine. Oddly, when the truth came out, some having suspected all along, audience preferred stage management. The show was more compelling, more fun than the underlying truth. This accounts, in my view, for the success of political theater. Although more a symptom than a cause, this tainted relationship with truth has propounded throughout society. Some examples are embraced by the public precisely because of their fakery. Things that are regularly falsified include photos, illustrations, and video, including deepfakes, AI-generated music found on Spotify and other streaming platforms, news reports, including advertising masquerading as news, pioneered by Linda Ellerby back in the day, scientific research and medical reports. Some of you might recall the hoaxing articles that were sent to peer-reviewed journals and subsequently published, plagiarized and AI-generated academic work, novels, textbooks, and op-eds, scam emails and texts from a friend or a family describing an emergency that needs immediate intervention, counterfeit brand name products, charities, nonprofits, and crowdsourced fund drives pretending to be for the benefit of some group or cause. Stage shows of a singing, dancing, holographic Elvis, Marilyn Monroe, or Tupac. Fact checkers with ideological biases, Wikipedia articles, and finally, relationships formed with chatbots. This list could go on indefinitely. Because of loss of authoritative information, anyone who hasn't committed a large part of their lives to developing critical thinking and principled skepticism is unlikely to possess the information, skill, experience, and competence to make sense of the world. Reliance on credentialed professionals who purport to have expertise used to be effective, but even they can no longer be trusted in routine interactions. Of course, there's little else one can do but to trust the dentist or the auto mechanic, except for lurking suspicions of being sold unnecessary work, or indeed of being entirely vulnerable to someone else's mental stability. We take everyday risks when traveling by car, or indeed merely going out in public, trusting other drivers and regular people not to fly into some unpredictable fit of road rage or erupt into a killing spree. Some of you might remember a few years ago the Germanwings pilot, Andreas Lubitz, who committed suicide at the helm of the plane, killing himself and 149 passengers. Add to this the difficulty of maintaining one's mental equilibrium in the face of current events so persistently horrifying and indescribably awful that functioning properly is challenged. In a 1981 novel by Ted Mooney called easy travel to other planets well before the internet, the author conjures an imaginary disease called information sickness that manifests in apparently regular people overcome by the daily information onslaught, the deluge of data demanding constant attention. Sufferers are reduced to a quivering mass of jangled nerves and word salad, falling into fits and tears on sidewalks, workplaces, and elsewhere. Sounds a little bit like Trump derangement syndrome to me. Frustrations and shame felt over rank historical injustice as one comes into an adult perspective and learns about history might explain in part the entire woke movement, a view of reality based on structural oppression. That morass, I defer to another speech, but at least let me offer this delicious quote by Elizabeth Nixon, spelled Nikson. Here I quote, "Scratch a pretty undereducated girl on the street, and she almost certainly believes she is a star seed here to make the world a better place through her intense feelings of compassion." End quote. Turning to economics, the ongoing destruction of the American middle class over the course of the past 50 years and persistent hostility toward labor by the ownership class have made pursuit of the American dream untenable. Never mind that the US dollar, a fiat currency, has been devalued over 90% since establishment of the Fed, and that US sovereign debt now stands at over $36 trillion, an amount that can never be paid off. The utter and complete fiction of cryptocurrencies and meme coins barely warrants mention here. The nature of work is changing too, with many jobs falling into the McJob category. Workers are often forced to work in or toil in heartless conditions and are cheated by their employers who game employment rules to deny a living wage or avoid providing benefits. The very meaning of gainful work has been upended when people working 2 or even 3 jobs fall further behind their bills into debt slavery. Pointing to GDP growth or Wall Street indexes as proof of economic strength belies the fact that life has frankly become unaffordable for a large percentage of Americans. Because the so-called good life, characterized by consumer goods and jockeying for social position, now requires a sizable bankroll, many Americans take on significant debt to adopt the pretense of participation. Worse, many young people have responded to economic strain by giving up hope of home ownership and by not having children, which downstream spells insolvency for various Ponzi schemes built into an economy based on perpetual growth. Refusal or perceived inability to participate in the pageant of life, the succession of generations, is demonstrated when refuseniks are aggregated as demographics. Of course, falling birth rates can be attributed in part to lower fertility among younger people because of endocrine disruptors, the result of inhabiting an environment thoroughly toxified by centuries of industrial activity. Interestingly, a cohort of middle-aged, unmarried, childless women derailed from the family track past generations took as a matter of course, have responded by insisting that they are fully satisfied without children and without spouses, declaring that they don't need no man because their pets, their houseplants, friends, and careers provide all the comforts and emotional salve they need. They are called brides of the state because they rely on government to provide services and protections men in households traditionally handle. However, turning to government institutions for solutions to the broken social contract is an exercise in futility. I should pause here to admit I imbibe some of that thinking, characteristic of brides of the state. I didn't get married until late in life. I have no children. I took career as the focus of my adulthood for at least 2 decades until I succumbed and finally had to get a job that would pay me enough to live. So if any of you feel like I'm attacking you in particular, or your children, for example, that's not the case. I'm guilty of many of the same behaviors I'm just describing. Institutions across the board are mere remnants of their former selves and no longer serve their missions. Instead, they fight for survival just like the rest of us. Through undeserved political appointments, many institutions are under attack from within by members of the professional managerial class. For example, calls to disband the Department of Education and withdrawal of that essential oversight are gaining ground. Turns out, many government appointees and elected officials are simply careerists, assuming the powers of former popes, kings, and tyrants rather than being public servants, capable administrators, or thought leaders informed by wizened political philosophy. They're like woke culture warriors subscribing to a politics of power counter to the Enlightenment, which is technocratic and autocratic in character and trends inevitably towards fascism. In an essay titled Democracy Fatigue, Arjun Appadurai writes, and here I quote, "These leaders who have risen to power in the new populist movements are typically xenophobic, patriarchal, and authoritarian in their styles. Followers may share some of these tendencies, but they're also fearful, angry, and resentful of what their societies have done for and to them," end quote. Curiously, populist leaders are precisely the daddy figures supported by brides of the state. Though considering the age of Biden and Trump in particular, maybe they should be called grandfather figures. Comparison to, say, the founding fathers, men of significant erudition and principle, demonstrates a remarkable loss of vision and leadership, a reversion to the mean, if you will, led not by statesmen, but by businessmen and billionaire hangers-on, whose interpretations of the US Constitution would be flatly unrecognizable to the drafters. Finally, short and long-term crises experienced in the West and globally, plus constant scaremongering by the mainstream media, have alarmed people who respond by forfeiting their rights in favor of promises of ontological security. Those in charge figured out that the fastest way to the bottom of the brainstem, where rational thought becomes impossible, is to keep the citizenry in a constant state of precariousness. So they traffic in narratives that keeps everyone on edge. Trouble is, prospective catastrophes such as climate change, industrial collapse, and near-term human extinction absolutely need to be taken seriously. Actual catastrophes matter too. According to usafacts.org, natural disasters causing more than $1 billion in damage have increased more than 5-fold from an average of 3.3 per year in the 1980s to 17 plus per year during the period 2014 to 2023. Thus, doomsday scenarios and global risks mentioned above or before are quite real. Existential dread is an honest response. Sadly, government leaders have no realistic plans to avert disaster or indeed to govern competently, nor can they deliver on promises of security and restoration. Instead, governments have brazenly transformed themselves into kleptocracies useful for looting their respective treasuries, primarily through war profiteering. Prospects for change are nowhere on the horizon because patterns of human habitation would need to be fundamentally reconfigured to avoid destroying what's left of human habitats and those of the plants and animals humans depend on for survival. But destruction of habitats is precisely what has been occurring over the course of the modern period, another Enlightenment inheritance that cannot be the source of pride. So it's a little surprised that the world produced by the Enlightenment looks today like dystopia and must finally and powerfully be rejected. In conclusion, the persistent inability of progressivism to deliver even a small approximation of utopia in spite of impressive material gains trumpeted by, for example, Steven Pinker in Enlightenment Now, has led to frustrated desire and impatience. This sometimes takes the form of the banal challenge, "Where's my flying car?" but actually resonates much deeper in the realization following World War I that technical innovations could just as easily be turned against the people and toward weaponry, revealing a hideous failure to outgrow inhumane treatment of others enacted throughout history. Fixation on Nazis as the ultimate baddies only distracts from failure to rise above our worst instincts. More recent events in Israel and Palestine, and indeed throughout the Middle East, further confirm that the ancient world endures in practice, unallayed by moral growth. Frustrated desires have now transformed into corrupted desires, with various entities seeking to gain or preserve wealth, power, and renown, heedless of collateral damage. So what does the future hold in store? Well, because it hasn't happened yet, certainty is elusive. However, barring nuclear exchange or an unexpected innovation in energy production, such as nuclear fusion, basement thorium reactors, or zero-point energy from the quantum realm, my expectation is that technocratic management will continue to flounder as long as the lights stay on. Power brokers will continue to consolidate wealth and political power in the hands of a few fantastically rich individuals, leaving the rest of us scrambling for scraps. Most people occupied by the days or needs of daily life will remain blithely unaware that the modern period is ending and history is poised on the precipice of a major transition. The realization will be clear all at once when smartphones no longer work and no one can find out why, because energy, transportation, and communications networks have all seized up. In the meantime, leadership will exhibit behaviors consistent with the nihilistic phrase attributed to King Louis XV of France, "Après moi le déluge," except that it will be après nous, meaning all of us.
Okay. Excellent speech. I got it for the first question, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
I'd like to know what you're talking about the loss of human connection, the loss of human autonomy, the self-absorption that was made possible by the Enlightenment. How do you see any kind of solution for it?
In a word, no, I see no solution. This is the track we're on. It will play through to completion.
And what would be the playthrough to completion? Very briefly, you may have touched on it in a speech, but just briefly tell me what that is.
In the conclusion, I pointed to an intensification of the current conditions while the lights stay on, and after that, it will be collapse, industrial, civilizational collapse.
Okay. Charlie, you got your hand up. Go ahead and ask your question.
Yes, Robert, you gave many sundry examples of the current status, I guess you would call it, of our culture. However, the Enlightenment was focused on reason and rationality, and I wasn't aware that culture ever was based on reason or rationality.
Really, I disagree with Charlie.
I'm not sure what your question is.
You're calling for a new enlightenment. And you gave examples from culture. But culture has never been based in reason or rationality, a culture.
Actually, it has.
Well, you can rebut it, Ernie.
Is there Ernie there?
Yeah, he is. I just muted Ernie. That's okay, Ernie. I just muted you. Don't worry. We'll get you unmuted when it's your turn. We see you. All right, go ahead. Go ahead, Robert.
Chuck, you haven't answered a question. You're making an assertion. I will agree that culture is at root emotionally based, not rationally based. However, we do adopt, oppose, or pretense of rationality as a means of organizing societies and running them effectively.
Okay.
Let's do it another way. Is there less rationality in the world?
Yes.
Okay, that's good enough.
Okay, who's next with the questions? Go ahead.
I'm just using the mic for the benefit of the Zoom
Yeah,
nosebleed seats. The title of your presentation is the Counter Enlightenment, but when Tim asked about what does completion mean, you said collapse. Counter Enlightenment to me sounds like some kind of alternate program. Collapse does not seem like an alternate program. So how do you square this collapse idea that it seems like entropy or decay, but we're calling the presentation Counter Enlightenment?
Collapse is in the future. All civilizations fail. Our present situation, the culture as I understand it, is based on ideals developed at the outset of the Enlightenment. We are abandoning and losing sight of those ideals and instead trying to either go back in time when things were better or go forward in time to some sort of imagined Star Trek future where we have replicators and transporters and warp drive, something like that. We become an interplanetary species. That's exactly the thing that Elon Musk is arguing, that we need to preserve human consciousness by becoming interplanetary and colonizing Mars. So to answer your question, we're not content anymore with the Enlightenment. It doesn't inform our thinking. Instead, we're bifurcating our hopes for the future by either going back to some sort of rustic pastoralism or into some sort of techno future.
okay, Sam, you're next. Go ahead. Sam, you're next. And unmute
Yeah,
and ask your question.
Hi, I just have a clarifying question. And that was, maybe you mentioned it, but and I missed it, but you stated that communications would be seized or shut down. Why would that happen, or why do you perceive that would be happening?
The word seized is like a machine grinding to a halt. The networks will no
I like the
longer
word
operate.
seized.
That doesn't mean somebody taking them over and
Okay.
commanding them.
So then how would they be discontinued or seized or whatever?
The loss of energy to operate them.
So like you mentioned specifically, for instance, smartphones. How would those not be usable or anymore? Or, I mean, even if smartphones went away, they would be, I'm guessing they would be replaced by something else, some other technology. So I think I'm missing something here.
Well, contrary to the lyric in music that money makes the world go around, it's actually energy that makes the world go around. The late modern period has been an absolute energy binge based on sunlight collected over millions of years and transformed into fossil fuels, which we are burning up at an unsustainable rate. Either they will become exotic and unavailable, or they will become uneconomic and we won't go for any of it anymore, at which point the energy network that keeps the lights on will seize up and fail to function, which means all the smartphones go dead.
Do you think there would not be some other technology that we would figure out coming up? I mean,
I mentioned 3, but I don't believe they're anywhere close to being real.
okay,
Okay,
Fusion
all right,
energy,
I'm done.
thorium reactors, and zero-point energy are the 3 that I mentioned.
Okay, thank you.
I don't have enough technical expertise to describe it, but you're welcome to investigate yourself.
okay. Okay, why don't we, if we have questions, why don't we get up where I can get a microphone? Who else has a question from the? Okay,
I got a question.
all right, well, then let's, go ahead, Don.
Okay.
Loud, please, so we can hear you.
Okay, well, yeah, that's, okay, I do have a question. What, you used the term Trump derangement syndrome. What's that?
Oh, God.
No, I don't know what it is. I've heard that, I have no idea. Look, I mean, I've heard Republicans use that term, but I'm not a Republican, so I have no idea what they're talking about. Can you explain it to me? Him, not you.
My understanding of Trump derangement syndrome is that when Trump was elected the first time in 2016,
Yeah.
liberal Democrat voters, not all of them, but enough of them, lost their minds.
Oh, okay.
They became deranged.
Oh, they became deranged. Oh my goodness. Okay. Okay. So you're saying
It's a joke,
oh, okay. So you're saying a lot of us.
but there's some truth to it as well.
Oh, you're saying a lot of us lost our minds when Trump got elected.
Yes.
Oh,
It's not
okay.
just
I
me
didn't
saying
ask
it.
you. I didn't ask you.
Not just me saying it. It's been all over the media for the last 8 years.
Oh, okay.
And
Okay.
then how do
Okay.
you explain his second term?
Well, he didn't get really elected the first time around. Anyway, but all right. But that's okay. Okay.
All
The
right.
point of saying Trump derangement syndrome is that the information sickness I cited from the book from 1981 prefigures it.
Ah.
We've seen images of people on the sidewalk screaming at nothing because they're deranged. They can't take it. They fall into tears and dysregulation.
How do you know they're deranged? Are you a psychologist?
They behave that way on the street.
How do you know? How do you know that they what mean? What? So in other words, their behavior seems like the behavior of a deranged person. That's what you're saying. Okay.
All right, all right.
That's up to 10.
Well, okay, now let's move on. Who else has questions? Okay, why don't you, no, well, then you gotta make yourself really loud so we can hear you.
Okay, but there's a word for the Trump theory, and that is this cryptocurrency. I like to call it fake currency or phony currency. But you mentioned it briefly. However, you think that might have something to do about collapse of collapse of the culture, and this is of course something that's cultural, though it uses quote science as a joke. They're having these computers generate false work. They're not doing actual useful work. Coming up with numbers are supposed to suffice. This crypto coin was quote mine.
We cannot hear the speaker.
I'll let you pontificate more about that.
That was a long question. I kind of lost the thread, but I think you were asking, does cryptocurrencies have anything to do with the thesis that I'm presenting?
Yeah.
And that fit in the section where I was talking about fakery and inability to tell what's real anymore. So cryptocurrencies aren't real money. I would assert that fiat currencies aren't real money either, especially because we can print them into existence and they have no basis in reality. They're claims on productivity, but there's so much money in circulation that it no longer corresponds to the industrial product, in short. So there's a major disconnect there, and the disconnect is only further illustrated by cryptocurrencies arising out of absolutely nothing.
Yeah, but there is a difference. One is that one is backed by the government and cryptocurrencies are not. But this plan of Trump to somehow maybe have them backed by the government, of course, will contribute to the destruction of civilization. Because they really are based on nothing. At least the fiat currencies are based on
Okay.
decision of the government.
I did collect a little bit of data that I didn't put into the speech that I'll read here. Crypto mining, counterparty validation of transactions on the blockchain network, and AI data centers are notoriously energy intensive, contributing to global electricity consumption. In 2022, these two sectors accounted for approximately 2% of global energy demand, a figure expected to rise to 3.5% by 2026. The idea of cryptocurrencies as a
Medium of exchange.
thank you, is preposterous because of how many different computers it has to hit in the blockchain authentication process. It's energy intensive. It's not like me handing you a $10 bill.
You proved my point, basically. There's a substantial difference.
I lost track of your point, but if we're in agreement, terrific.
Cryptocurrency, or so-called, let's call them phony currency, and a real currency. It might be different, and there might be some problem with people. It's more than backed up by gold, but it is backed up by the promise of gold. You don't have to, I think, maybe too much.
Another question? So that the nosebleed seats can hear, I'm standing up here again. You made a mention, I enjoyed your talk, by the way. I thought it was really good. You made a mention of, in your very exhaustive list of things that are happening, you know, for example, support for liberal democracy declining and representative government and self-determination and things like that. I wish I were more well versed in some of the stuff out there, you know, like neo-reaction and the Dark Enlightenment and stuff like that. So, you know, figures like Curtis Yarvin and so forth. But one of the things that I'm noticing is that what passes for liberal democracy is just a sham anyway. And what I think is people want what they want. They thought liberal democracy was the way to get it. And when it reveals itself to be a sham, they want to move on to something else. things I'm thinking of, and I'll get to the question in a second, things I'm thinking of are like, Romania, I think, had an election, and then their like Supreme Court just said, nope, 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 you don't get to vote for your people. We've determined that there was too much Russian influence or something. Like, okay, whatever. They voted for it and it didn't happen. That crook Zelensky in Ukraine, oh, we're gonna shut down media outlets and parties and stuff like that. And so my question is it support for liberal democracy is declining because liberal democracy is failing, or because it's being abandoned?
That was a long introduction to the question. I argue that it's being abandoned because it's failing, or because it has failed. So citing the American dream and home ownership and the succession of generations each having a better life than the one before is part of the Enlightenment inheritance, in my view. But it has reversed in the past generation or so. And now people are finding that their children can't get started in life. There's a failure to launch. And the institutions that we used to have that provided a launch pad for young people is no longer functioning. Kids boomerang to their parents after college. They end up working jobs either at Starbucks or at some fulfillment center, living out of a camper. Who knows what goes on with 25-year-olds, for example. There's nobody in that age group here in this room. I guess they're busy trying to keep themselves warm in the winter cold, while those of us here enjoy our dinner and our drinks.
Okay, Charlie, you're next. Go ahead. Charlie?
Yes, Bob, you can stay there. Bob, you made an assertion or statement that the video screen has replaced the printed page, if I'm correct. However, according to the American Booksellers Association, the number of books published in the United States has remained the same for probably 10 years or longer, at around 50 to 55,000. And the volume of book sales on a dollar basis has remained the same. In fact, has increased a little bit. So it has not replaced anything.
That's not a question.
As the printed, despite the evidence to the contrary, as the video screen in fact replaced the book.
You can make a rebuttal in the rebuttal section, Charlie.
Yeah, Charlie, I think that's for the rebuttal. All right, who's next? Come on, we gotta have some more questions.
What about the rebuttal?
We'll go to them in a few minutes.
One further question?
Go ahead. All right, we'll get anybody online. Yeah, what we'll do then. It may be only 6:16, but we'll get into the rebuttal section after this. Unless nobody else online's got anything to add.
So my question, which is going to be briefer, is like in the course of United States history, what is the worst thing to happen to the country, and why is it the 19th Amendment?
Female suffrage,
Uh,
The 19th Amendment is suffrage for females.
That's
So you're asserting that's the worst thing that's happened in US history? Well, I don't agree with that statement. The idea of the rights-bearing individual extends to everyone, male, female, all races, all colors, all creeds, all religions or lack of religion, everybody. Everyone is equal before the law. They deserve the same rights. That doesn't mean we all perform the same roles in society.
Okay, any other questions? Any other questions? All right, Andy, go ahead. Come on up and use the mic if you can. Then we'll go into rebuttals shortly.
Unless I missed it in your presentation, I didn't hear anything talking about the worldwide revolution in efficiency in solar. Are you familiar with the work of Rocky Mountain Institute? That's my question, because they basically solar systems have dropped in cost about 95% since 1980, and there's houses that are charging their electric cars and running the house right off the roof right in this area right now. It's not in the future, it's happening now, and there's a tremendous amount of hope for that. I just wondered if in all your research, if you'd run across any of those articles that are spreading that knowledge around the world.
Okay. Good question, Andy.
The entity you referred to, Rocky Mountain something?
Rocky Mountain Institute.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar with that in particular, but based on a considerable amount of reading that I have done over a period of almost 2 decades now, I've come to the conclusion that energy demand continues to rise. Energy production got a shot in the arm with the development of fracking in particular, so that we were able to avoid peak oil back in 2006 for roughly 2 decades. And now energy production will start tapering off. We will fall back down the energy gradient. The problem with increases of efficiency and alternative energies is that you run into problems of scale, where replacement sources, not fossil fuels, won't power the planet at our current level of demand. And when energy is available cheaply, like any kind of efficiency, you run into Jevons paradox. It drives further demand. It doesn't reduce demand. There's no demand destruction that accompanies efficiency.
Okay. Did you want to have a question? Okay. Let us, all right. Let us thank Robert Holland tonight for a very good speech and a very good fit on the human condition. I'm going to be your first rebutter. I'll give everybody about 5 minutes. All right. First of all, Robert, I think what you've forgotten is the central question about all of this. Has our technology and our society and our cultural norms actually changed the human condition? Has it? I don't think so. Technology and the Enlightenment cannot address the deeper needs of the human soul. If anything, it's kind of helped augment those deeper needs of the human soul. Have we traded our human condition of getting along with people for the self-absorption and the multitude of superficial online relationships that are now available to you technologically? You know, on the one hand, I can get at my fingertips on my smartphone almost any question answered as quickly as possible. And even with the development of artificial intelligence, I can get a good, cohesive, well put out speech modified to my own needs through my experience with Toastmasters and make a good speech on it. On the other hand, too, I could just copy and paste that speech and say it's mine and be evil and all that other good stuff. The point of the matter is, you know, you may be speaking about the Enlightenment. You may be speaking about the human condition. but it doesn't cure what ails man. And what ails man is that we are all sinners. We are acquiesced from our Creator. We all want to run our own way. We all want to do our own thing. And we all do not like authority. We all run and do things to and fro. We try to get together, and because people have a deeper need for a connection with the Creator, we have people then taking the false gods. Amongst them are technology, or it could be many passions that are uncontrollable, or a lot of other multitudinal things. You see, what we have to do is really embrace technology, make it our servant and not our master. And that means for us to really master our own emotions and our own sin. It's what I consider the purview of some modern philosophers by the name of Fulton Sheen, who was a religious broadcaster, Billy Graham, who also said the same thing, and of course St. Thomas Aquinas, my soul will not rest until it rests with thee. What it simply means is what Solomon said and here is the end of the matter, here is the end of all things. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the sum and whole existence of man. Meaning, we need to bring our God and our principles of him back into our society, back into what we need to do. And I'm not saying you do it through government edict or government force, but by your own means and your own conclusions. But what I am saying is that if you haven't gone to church lately, or a synagogue, or your mosque, it might be time to go again and learn a little bit more about human compassion, human relationships, and getting along with others, because that's what it's really all about. Thank you very much.
Well, I should fear God.
All right, Charlie, go ahead and rebut. You're up next, Charlie.
All right, I'd like to thank Robert Holland for putting together a detailed summary and analysis of our current society. I'll be very brief this time around. I've been studying intellectual history, specializing in it, and talked at the college in particular on events of the Enlightenment, a significantly interesting period for anyone with degrees, myself in philosophy. It was a singularly intriguing period and a transformation which replaced some of the basic relationships and redefined them. There are the few things the Enlightenment focused on was rights. They invented the concept of rights. They relied on rationality, and they particularly focused on, that's what I mean, rights, rationality, and the relationship of the individual to the state. Now, in terms of individual rights, I think we have not had any issue except in the issues of employment, in which your rights as an employee have eroded significantly, as evidenced by the decline in union membership. The marketing forces seem to have occupied the field of battle at the moment. I don't think that will persevere. It's been going on long enough. However, if there's any one area of human rights which needs to be focused on, and you hit upon it there regarding employment in the fast food industry. There's going to be, and we're seeing changes such as the Starbucks employees seizing the initiative. These are largely young people, and they're not going to tolerate this one's lopsidedness that currently exists regarding labor law. The other thing is the relationship to the state. And I find that particularly interesting, and it was briefly mentioned is, and I will say the reason people voted for Trump is because of their relationship to the state. I believe the Trump voters felt that they had been neglected or overlooked or were forgotten about and were not important. We hear that here at the college from the one guy who keeps harping on the fact that illegal aliens allegedly have more rights and benefits than a naturalized American citizen. See, the government, don't vote for the current government, vote for Trump. Otherwise, they're taking your money and giving it to those who are undeserving. And this is the backlash. That's the totality of largely it. And they've been, the relationship to the state, they were not happy with. And they didn't like it. So the guy comes along and says, I'm going to change all that. Rural people, in particular, we're saying all the money is going to the cities and we get nothing in return, which is not in fact the case. Rural areas usually get more federal money in return. But nevertheless, we gave a lot to talk about. It's hard to figure out what to focus on. But anyhow, yeah, I'm not certain if we need a counter enlightenment. The old one is good. Perhaps we need a reinstatement of it and a reassertion of it. They formed the basic framework. I think their thinking was sound. And if anything, there's other countries around the world that are moving in that direction. Okay, thank you, Bob, and please come again.
All right. Remember, we still got some time, so now's a good time to rebut.
I'll rebut.
And then right go up chair, and then she
after
goes.
she's rebut.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've got my timer set for 5 minutes, okay?
Okay,
And we're gonna start.
make
this
sure you
over
use the
again.
mic.
Yeah, but I just wanted to set the timer. Oops, wait a minute here.
Don't worry. What you just go ahead and talk. We'll get you.
Sorry.
It's all right. We'll
All right. I wanted to talk about the film Oppenheimer
Oh, great.
because it was so, I don't like that, I don't think it was a great movie. And the reason I don't is I'm going to give you. And that is the movie Oppenheimer illustrates so much of what the guy tonight, what was his name?
Robert Holland.
Robert Holland illustrates so much of what he said. And that is that the audience was not trusted with the story. The story would start and change to a different scene. Then there'd be a big explosion to attract the audience's attention. You'd go back to some character who was very important in developing the bomb, but you don't know who it was, who was talking to Oppenheimer. The only person really identifiable of Oppenheimer's associates was Eisenhower. No, Einstein. Well, Keller too. Yeah, and then there was that young man who was really an awful person. I can't remember. But anyway, and so it would change from one thing to another. And when you got bored, you'd get a big explosion. But the thing that I objected to the most was the way the music was used to demand of the audience members how they were supposed to feel about the story. And especially at the end when they were counting down to the boom, how the music pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed, as though we in the audience didn't have the sense to know that the tension was building. I feel that this movie really, really illustrates what the speaker said tonight. And I also want to talk about the film, about the song, Cats in the Cradle. And remember the story of Cats in the Cradle, where the father calls his son and wants to get together. And the father then remembers that when his father called, he didn't have time either. And he calls his son and he doesn't have time. What's left out of this is that the father wants time with his son. He doesn't want to contribute to the son's new family. The son has a family. He has a new job. He's got kids that are sick. and he doesn't have time to take away from all that to visit his father. But his father doesn't say, what can I do to help you? Let me contribute some money to the family, or let me take care of the kids for a while you go and do something that needs to be done, or you've got a new job, you really need to take some time out to think about that, and I'll stay with the kids for a while. He doesn't do any of that. He just feels sorry for himself because his son doesn't have time for him, and he didn't have time for his father, and that's how it goes down. The only way to stop the cats in the cradle is for the father to change, for the father to say, oh, maybe I can contribute something, maybe I can help. So I'm going to miss a lot of what I wanted to say because I'm so disorganized. But I wanted to bring up something that I ran into this week. Oh my goodness, this thing, I don't know how it works.
Just keep talking. Don't
Okay,
worry.
I've got 1 minute left, but
Take two if
there's
you
a
need it.
there's a new article out called the why Google discontinued its quantum chip. And you should really read the reason why Google discontinued its quantum chip, because it goes into cryptocurrency, which is just a total waste. It goes into Bitcoin, which is the worst scam that has come down probably in the last 5 years or in our generation. And the quantum chip has led even scientists into so many unanswered questions that Google decided to abandon it. But there are lots of pictures of the quantum chip in this video that would be really interesting for people to see, because it's not a chip, it's a construction bigger than a person that has a lot of connections and things inside that who would understand it. So I recommend that you Google why Google abandoned the quantum chip. And let's see. I am never amazed by anything that anybody at the College of Complexes comes up with. But to say that, you know, because you can say anything here, you can even say that the worst thing that ever happened in American history was for women to get the vote.
Right.
And I think that is just a really extraordinary statement. So I think that whoever wants to say that should at least defend themselves, but I don't want them to defend themselves until I get a chance to rebut. So I don't know what to say about that. That's a really weird thing to say.
To quote Archie Bunker, I'm all for women's liberation as long as they stay at home to cook and clean.
Right. Right. That's right. Okay, can I talk?
Go right ahead, Don.
Okay. Good speech.
All right. Okay, good presentation. I was all right. Yeah, one of the things that I've noticed, I think that really, yeah, I was just listening to what people are saying and so on, and I really want, and one of the things that I noticed that keeps coming up over and over again, and what people are talking about is what I call identity politics. Because there's this thing where we've really gotten hung up on identity politics. You know, people to fight each other. You know, we got black versus white, men versus women, native versus foreign, young versus old, gay versus straight, religious versus non-religious. Now, this is all a distraction. This is, and by the way, both major political parties do it in this country. I mean, they just take opposite sides in the culture wars. But the whole thing, and the media plays along, where you get Fox News taking one side of the culture wars, you get MSNBC taking the other side. And the whole thing is a distraction. It's a distraction from what the real issue is, which they don't want to tell you about, because the news media, the traditional news media is corporate owned, and both parties are primarily corporate sponsored. So the real conflict in this country is between the ruling class and the rest of us, the American people. And, you know, what the ruling class, you know, the billionaires, the owners of the corporations, what they want is for us to all fight each other so that we don't fight them. Because the last thing they want is somebody like Luigi Mangione coming along. So, you know, so basically it's a divide and rule strategy. You know, what we need to do is join together and throw the bums out. This country belongs to us, not the billionaires.
Your wish is my command. I will make at least an attempt to defend my statement. I'm going to revise it, actually. I'm not going to say that the 19th Amendment is the worst thing to happen in American history. That's an effect of the antecedent thing, which is the worst thing to happen in American history, which is feminism. I don't care what wave you're talking about. First, second, third, fourth, fifth, 18th, it doesn't matter. All of it is awful. All of it is terrible. I believe the speaker tonight mentioned he sort of defended universal suffrage and specifically female suffrage by talking about, you know, well, everybody has equal rights and equality under the law, even if it means that there are different roles. The problem with different roles and allowing for the different roles, but still having equal rights is some roles have greater responsibility than other roles. If that's the case, then what we have is equal rights, but unequal responsibilities. That's incoherent and that's wrong. And that, I think, violates equality under the law. Because if you have equal rights, you know, like the equal privileges, the benefits that you get, without correspondingly equal responsibilities, like, say, having to sign up for the draft, women don't have to sign up for the draft and they can vote. Men, if they don't sign up for selective service, they don't get to vote. That is wrong. So either women shouldn't vote because they don't get drafted, or women should be drafted, including to the front lines, which is also absurd. So my argument is, and I think it is sufficiently demonstrated by women don't have to sign up for the draft, that the 19th Amendment should be repealed. Another thing is, if you look at any breakdown, at least lately, and maybe it's been this way for a while, but any breakdown lately of fidelity to free speech principles, men are much more likely to adhere to free speech principles than women are. Like in the 60s, men favor free speech, even if it means people are offended. Whereas women, on the other hand, I forget what poll, I can't cite a specific source at the moment, but I'm sure you can look it up easily enough. Women, on the other hand, by a 60-something percentage, they think that free speech should be curtailed if it offends people or it veers into something called hate speech, which I think is a fiction for tyrants to try to erode free speech rights as a whole. I think you should be able to say hateful things. I think you should be able to say untrue things and misinformation things without having the government lean on you and pressure you or pressure your social media company to throttle or demonetize or doing any of that stuff. Men and women are different, and they are not interchangeable units. And it might be worth considering that perhaps because they are different and perhaps because they simply cannot serve in the same roles in society, that maybe universal suffrage is stupid. Thank you.
Go ahead, Andy.
I'd like to thank Robert for a good talk tonight. Oops. Oh, hold on. We lost the camera. Take a break.
It's all right, we'll get it back up. I'm sorry. Don't worry about it, we're fine, sir.
All right.
Simple matter of refocus and
Yeah, try to cram 2 hours worth of thoughts into 5 minutes. I'll try to hit the highlights. Everybody knows we have big problems. If I coach seventh graders in Science Olympiad, we teach seventh graders universal, a universal truth to seventh graders is in order to solve any problem, you have to first correctly identify the problem and then correctly identify the solution. We're being gaslighted by the media on such a variety of subjects. They have a large percentage of Americans walking around thinking they know what's going on, and they have been sucked into the media cult where people believe things that didn't happen. Other people believe things that aren't real. The old saying was Jim Jones back in the 90s of drinking the Kool-Aid. 900 people died or something of cyanide. The two websites I mentioned, Want to Know Info and Want to Know Info and Greg Palast both have Greg Palast just published an article on the numbers of how Trump was installed with massive voter fraud. And his article is titled, Trump Lost, Voter Suppression Won. This was the most voter suppressed, messed up election in the history of our country. Now, a whole bunch of people are claiming that the election was stolen from Trump in 2020. Well, in a sense, that's true. The dirty tricks that Trump, the voter suppression that worked in 2016, scrubbing Democrats from the polls so that Trump could get elected, those things were declared illegal and not permitted in 2020. So there were enough honest mainstream people counting the votes that we had an accurate vote count, and we voted Trump out and Joe Biden got elected. Now in 2024, there was voter suppression in 43 states. They learned what their mistakes were in 2020 because Trump lost it then. So that's why he's been saying stolen, stolen, stolen. They've been putting in key criminals in places all over the country in place of honest people that would give us an honest vote count, so that there was no way any Democrat could have beaten Trump in this last election because the fix was in. We have three big complexes. Eisenhower warned us about the military industrial complex. We have the medical industrial complex and the big pharma media complex. The big pharma controls, if you watch TV ads, a lot of the ads are for Ozempic, Wegovy, Biktarvy, all kinds of expensive drugs. They control to a large extent what we see in here and what we don't see on the media. The military and complex, industrial complex, and the people they put in office in the Bush-Cheney administration helped create the event we know as 9/11. The official story of 9/11 sent to us by the media. Here's a person already laughing because we've been gaslit, is showered a fire hose of BS for so long. People don't know that 7 buildings were destroyed in New York. They filmed the first 2 and didn't show the film of the destruction of the other 5 over a 2-day period. 4 buildings came down on 9/11. 4 buildings were reduced to total rubble. The other 3 were damaged with explosives and brought down with cranes and carried away quick. The whole site was roped off you couldn't get cameras in there. They didn't want anybody to see the effects of what controlled demolition would do to cut the girders apart. That's 9/11. The second
What
thing.
did they use?
Charlie, let him speak.
I have a hobby. I translate books into one-page cliff notes. So the information I just gave you about 9/11 is not my opinion. It's like, I'm sorry if you think the earth is flat, but that's not my opinion. That's a collective opinion of thousands of scientists over the world. If you have flat earth ignorance on any one subject, that's your problem. The facts are the facts once they're known. And more people are moving forward. This book here is new, The Medical Pharmaceutical Killing Machine. On page, I think it's page 125, 125 here, it has the list of the top 25 steps in what is called now in lawsuits, that was too early, the FDA death protocol. Over 500,000 people were poisoned and killed with toxic drugs during the COVID crisis. We were told those people were dying of COVID. They weren't. They were being murdered in the hospitals. This book, what the nurses saw, is a whole bunch of eyewitness testimony of nurses, long careers, some of them. They resigned or they couldn't go along with the killing. When they saw the doctors were following the protocol, giving toxic medicines and running people's immune system down and killing them intentionally, they tried to stop it. And when they resigned, hit the mute. So none of these books contain anything that relates to my opinion at all. They are a summary of people that are risking their lives. They're risking their lives to try to get the word out and save lives. Now, these nurses collectively saved a lot of lives and got, so the last thing I would say is I challenge anybody to challenge any of the facts that I've brought here. Nobody has ever challenged any of the facts I've summarized because they're facts and they're backed by, each subject is backed by hundreds of thousands of scientists giving us a database, okay? So here's Charlie yelling. Charlie doesn't want me to speak, and that's the problem because he's been heckling me for the last 3 years for giving the truth. And that's what we need here. We need to exchange pieces of truth so people can move forward. Anyway, as I said before, I will have a table in the back with some information. You can peruse these books and others and have flyers on a summary of what I just said. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, who's next for the rebuttals? Who's next? Go right ahead. You're next, sir. He's right here. Charlie's right there.
I'm not feeling too well tonight, so I may not. Oh, my name is Doug Binkley. You know, I've been to this Counter complexes numerous times. The speaker tonight has provided very interesting talking points and a lot to delve into. Be interesting to look at his talk again if it gets online and maybe delve into it a bit. Certainly some of the subjects, you know, like how we are using up energy because of this false euphoria of the fracking, developing more leads to natural gas, which, you know, and oil and burning that and creating carbon dioxide and all the natural gas that escapes as methane, as you know, as is a fact, because scientists, you know, take carbon dioxide and then they measure the actual results. And like in a greenhouse, they measure what, you know, occurs when you have a greenhouse effect. So, and they know that methane has a greenhouse effect of, you know, something like 10 times carbon dioxide, 40 times. Okay, I'm underestimating. So don't, you know, say I'm exaggerating. Now, we also, so we have all of these things that are, I mean, the speaker was very not optimistic, but he could have also chosen to cherry pick maybe facts that would be optimistic. And yes, we should have had fusion already if Google had followed through on their Google project that they were going to have fusion for us in 5 years or something. They said they were going to have the geniuses do it. But people are working on it right now, and they made a slight breakthrough, but it wasn't as good as they said because they exaggerated their results. But they still made a little bit of progress towards that. But the cultural side, that was what Speaker Dr. Holland was getting into. That we're having a crisis of our culture. And this is the terrible thing that even if science progresses and gives us hope for optimism that we can somehow circumvent this horrible global warming disaster that's ruining people willy-nilly as we speak. In Los Angeles, another fire came up, and excessive winds caused by global warming are making those fires worse. And then Trump doesn't want to even provide FEMA. He wants to shut FEMA down. I mean, that's the latest thing. It's a horrible thing that people have this problem that they couldn't get their heads around, that yes, Biden was old, and then, okay, they wanted him to drop out. He did drop out, and then, oh, well, they couldn't get their heads around Kamala Harris. Well, she's half black, or maybe she's not half black, or she's half Asian. Do I have a minute or two? I am ranting because I'm going all over the place, but the talk went all over the place too. If it had been able to be longer, maybe it could have been all tied together a lot better. But the guy's very bright. He's very intelligent, and he's very creative and well read. So my hat's off to you, sir. But we have to be optimistic. We are human beings on this planet, and if you believe in a purposeful universe, possibly don't. I'm a scientist, but I think there's still something out there in the principle that I forgot what the name of it is. I was just reading a book about it again. That the constants of nature are so put together for us to exist at all, for life to exist, and for us as human life to exist at all. And the fact that we have evolved in these 4 billion years, that the sun is only going to be available for 10 billion years. And it's so, all these things are so commandeered or put together by some kind of focus that we are important, and we must surmount the pessimism, and we must put ourselves together to get past this 4 years of Trump being a complete lunatic and people believing in him and going along with his stuff, so that we can move on to a better future and make progress at last.
Okay, who else? Anybody else want to rebut? Go right ahead. You got 5 minutes, sir, and if you need to go a little longer, go ahead.
I got my stopwatch. Thank you so much. My name is Jordan Simon. I'll keep this to 5 minutes or less.
Okay, welcome, sir.
Thank you. My name is Jordan Simon. It's my first time here. Got a fine group of people here with some great free-flowing ideas. I really appreciate Dapper's hosting. That's pretty cool too. And I have a background. I've been working in information technology for the last 18 years of my life. And I have some pretty interesting perspective on what I heard today and from some of you that had your rebuttals. And for Dr. Holland for giving this presentation, which I really appreciate, because it's a great perspective as to where we're de-evolving, I believe, over time into a new era. We're already there. Essentially, the de-evolution is not just happening here in the United States, but it's globally. You see leaders we're losing intellectual ability for battle cries, essentially. And it's scary when you think about the future, whether you're Republican or you're Democrat or you're independent or whatever you are, doesn't really matter. X person's in the driver's seat. We're dependent on X person to get us through whoever that X person is, the president's seat, the governor's seat, mayor of Chicago, whoever we're talking about. They have to get us through the next whatever term they're serving. And to Dr. Holland's point, I think that the Enlightenment period has ended for the United States, and we've been on like a downward spiral probably now for the last 15 years for sure. And I can only hope that there's a glimmer of light left, that hopefully we can pull ourselves out of this strut, because America's not what it used to be in the 1950s. And there were some statements that were made earlier that were kind of debatable as to some of the worst things that happened in the United States. I don't understand why you would say that, But I do understand why you would make a statement like that. It's the same reason why people are keyboard warriors on the internet. They're in person. No one would say something like that. Well, but anyways, we're kind of de-evolving, and social media is doing this to us. And it's been happening since probably the last 15 years or so, probably since 2005. Anyway, sorry, I'm rambling. I know I only have
It's okay, go
2
ahead.
minutes left.
You got time.
I see us de-evolving, and I don't see any stop. I think we're already there when we were talking about full collapse versus partial collapse, or whatever, however you want to describe collapse. Collapse may have already happened. Maybe collapse is when the nukes go off, or maybe collapse is when you don't have power anymore, or maybe the collapse is everyone wants to be an OnlyFans model or an influencer, and nobody wants a real job anymore. But we're already there. I don't, the way I see it, the society as we knew it 15 years ago, 30 years ago, 60 years ago, is not here anymore. Globally, not just in the United States. And it's a continuing problem, and it's essentially caused by, or the event horizon for that is social media. Social media is what killed us. And it's going to take probably some type of dark age to live through to be able to pull out to the other side where people realize, hey, we need plumbers and electricians, and we need doctors and lawyers. We don't need influencers and people who are useless or cryptocurrency brokers. That's all I got.
Okay, who else wants to go? Who else, has anybody else have a rebuttal? We got some extra time. All right, you want to go ahead again?
Oh, I'm willing to give another.
All right, well,
Don't let her go.
All right.
Time limit? It's gotta be a lot less.
Well, we'll go 2 to 3 minutes now if we're gonna do a second round so that everybody can speak.
Was the last speaker Clarence Simon? Pardon me? Jordan Simon. Oh, I wish when people get up, they'd introduce themselves, which I don't do. I'm Jan Budar. I always forget. It was really interesting what Jordan said about devolution, because I look around at my email and at the people I know and what's going on way, way undercover. And I think our next stage of evolution is to be a less violent and warlike species. And I think our evolution could be tending in that direction, because I see a lot of people who are, today I can't believe I spent 4 hours watching a video, or not a video, but it was a live Zoom called Armageddon. I can't remember the name of it, of course. Something about Armageddon and preventing Armageddon, and how to get the War Department to spend less money on weapons. And all the people there were peacemongers. And there's a lot of us out there, and we're sort of undercover right now, but one would hope that the next stage of our evolution is to be less warlike, and one can hope for that. And about the lady who was on Zoom, who asked about how could our phone system go down. You need to read a book called Nuclear War by Annie Davidson, because at the end of the book, she explains how all of our electrical systems could be blotted out. And of course, the book is fiction. It's about a war between North Korea and the West. And but anyway, there's a name for it, which I am not going to be able to come up with. Okay, that was all I wanted to say, because I thought Jordan's idea about devolution is a choice. And the other choice is evolution. And we need, for the first time, human beings should be paying attention to their evolution. And what do we want to evolve into? And I don't think it's spending $1 trillion every 10 years on weapons.
Hey, Ernie, I'm gonna give you 5 minutes since you haven't spoken yet. Go ahead. Okay, Ernie, you gotta unmute. Unmute,
Okay,
Ernie.
yeah, great. Yeah, I apologize. I missed the speech. I came in just as you were finishing up, Robert, because I had technical problems getting on. I may have them finally solved, but in any case, I could still get a sense of what some of the things were that you were saying, and I will try and listen to your speech on YouTube. A couple quick comments. Again, the lady that was concerned about the cell phones not working, I think you probably indicated that in such a catastrophe, the electricity would not be working. And if there's no electricity, of course, none of the phone systems would work. The electric lights wouldn't work. A lot of other things wouldn't work, but even the toilets wouldn't work because most a lot of buildings, the internal system is electric, and if not that, the municipal system is electric, so we wouldn't have any water flowing, any clean water flowing. So cell phones would be the least of our problems. And then the remark about women, about the 19th Amendment, and that you should have the right to vote if you have equal responsibility. If you see, the gentleman talked about signing up for the draft. I do believe we should have a universal national service draft for both men and women, not necessarily to the military, but to give some service time to the country for a year or two, maybe after high school or after college, in some form or another, including military would be one of the options, but it wouldn't be the only one. So in that sense, I agree with him. The right to citizenship should be based on that. I also believe that the right to citizenship for new citizens should be learning English. If this country gets to the point where we don't have a common language, that will also be very, very damaging. And part of a citizenship test should be a language test. So I think that the notion of having to test and do certain things to get the right to vote, I think that makes all the sense in the world. I think Charlie alluded to that several weeks ago in one of his talks, that some people just really don't know what the heck they're voting for, and maybe there should be some restrictions. But I shouldn't try and say what he said. We'll let him say what he said. With regard to responsibility, I think one of the problems with feminism, and I'm generally for feminism, but the biggest responsibility and the most difficult job in the world, bar none, is raising children. And the most important job to society is the raising of our children. And that is done almost exclusively by women. And so I would say that if we were going to give votes based on that, well, then the women would get most of the votes, because that is the most important job. And to the extent that it takes women away from that job, it could be a problem. I'm not sure I believe that what some people say is we can have it all. Thank you very much.
Okay. Who else has got a rebuttal? I'll let you go again.
Okay.
Go, Don.
All right, I don't have anything to say, but I'll say it anyway.
Yeah.
All right, all right, all right. I the last time I kind of talked a little bit about politics in my last round one rebuttal speech, but I want to take it. I want to take a step back. I noticed a lot of pessimism. Our speakers kind of what I would say pessimistic, and I should probably explain the difference between an optimist, a pessimist, and a realist. An optimist is somebody who believes things are going to work out, even if there's no rational basis for thinking that. A pessimist is the opposite. A person who thinks that things are not going to work out, even when there's no evidence that things are going to go bad. I like to think that, you know, and I like to think that I'm more of a realist in the sense that I don't think we really know what's going to happen in the future. Yeah, things could go all to crap, but they might not. I think it's up to us to decide what we do, because you may not have control over the whole world, but you do have control over yourself and what you do as an individual, and you can decide what you want to do. If you feel like things are bad, you can get out and try to do something and make things better. Every one of us has the ability to do that. And I also, so I'm not ready to give up on the whole world, you know, and just say, oh, fuck it, I'm just going to go play video games. No, I'm gonna, you know, I'm still engaged. I mean, so I, so I don't, so I would say one other thing though, Robert, you mentioned, you said that every civilization has risen and fallen. That is kind of true in the West, the way they measure civilizations. You know, you get the Greek civilization, it falls. You get the Egyptian civilization, you get the Mesopotamian civilization, it gets replaced by the Islamic civilization, and you get the Roman civilization, it falls. You know, so the way we measure it. But if you look at that, it's not really true, because I mean, like, Indian civilization has existed for 5,000 years, and it's still pretty much the same civilization. It's still around. Chinese civilization has been around for 4,000 years, and they're still around. Japanese civilization has been around for 3,000 years, and it's still around. It's the West that has gone through these major changes, which do not actually mean an actual literal end of civilization, like you get with what happened with the Mayans during you know, in the pre-Columbian era, but it just means that the civilization evolved into becoming something else than it had been before. The breakup of the Roman Empire did not spell the end of civilization in Europe. It just means that civilization in Europe took on a different shape. Sure. So I think that so no, there's nothing inevitable about the end of civilization, or the idea that we're going to all lapse into barbarism or a dark age. Yeah, it could happen. I don't discount the possibility of it, but there's nothing inevitable about it. That's all I want to say.
All right, Charlie, you go ahead. All right, I just wanted to add that a lot of people may not be aware of the results of Enlightenment thinking. There were specifically our own American Revolution, followed subsequently by a revolution in France. Right. But what made this transition in power unique was that the Enlightenment thinkers didn't really replace those in charge of government, which is usually what happens. Meaning you take out one king and replace him with another in the hope that the replacement will be better. They looked upon the structure of government itself and transformed it into a system which had not existed previously, such as ensuring the rights of the individual.
Guillotine, guillotine.
No, in the Declaration of Rights of Man and the Citizen, they looked upon the rights of the citizen. We're talking about the new form of government that came in place. And so that's what I mean. Now, has this great experiment worked? Apparently not in France. It didn't last very long, but you could say that it did have its lasting effects. In the United States, I'll be quite honest with you, until the Trump administration came in, and January the 6th, we had always had orderly transitions of power. We do replace one leader with another. We replace the legislative body in different frequencies. But on January 6th, I believe there was a concerted effort to change the methodology. And that saddens me particularly. It saddens me that people would think this is appropriate. For the people who tried to perpetuate and interfere with the orderly transition. And I'd say there's a jail sentence not long enough. I think they should be deprived of citizenship and forbidden from any sort of activity in the future. That's all, but that's all. It's kind of a lot to think about here tonight, Robert. Thank you.
Okay, any more? Any more? All right, there's a couple more. We're gonna make it quick here, but we'll let Robert get online in about 10, 15 minutes here, and go ahead.
Yeah, the book I was referring to was the Anthropic Principle. That's what it's called. I was mentioning that some of the constants of nature happen to have fitted their values in such that we are allowed to have evolved on this planet, in this universe, because of this incredible congruence of things coming together. And we cannot sacrifice that, just like we cannot sacrifice the incredible experiment that this nation is. We cannot, let those guys down, like Washington and Jefferson and Lincoln, even Theodore Roosevelt. Don't let those guys on Mount Rushmore down, because this is an extraordinary experiment, and we must be optimistic, and we must pull back from the chasm that is before us, which would be the complete takeover of Trump and his fascist movement. This is a setback. The election was stolen. I firmly do believe that. I believe Greg Palast is right, as Annie Anderson has pointed out. He was on Tom Hartman the other day, so I encourage you to look that up. I encourage you to get courage. We are, those of us who want to defeat Trump and the fascists and ensure that human life endures on this planet, because who knows how badly they can ruin things for everything. Because global warming has already been setting off these fires and these incredible extra tornadoes and extra large hurricanes. They won't kill everybody, of course, but and of course the rich ones like Musk will figure out how to survive in a Dr. Strangelove way underground at the worst, right? Or blast off to Mars, and he wants to create a colony on Mars. Why don't you make sure that humans continue to live on this planet, Mr. Musk? Put your shoulder behind that, or put your brain behind that. What brain you have, because it doesn't appear you have that. It's the people that are working for you that do the stuff at SpaceX that's so wonderful. You just hire them. Well, figure it out, Mr. Musk. Use your billions for decency and creativity and the betterment of mankind. And the same goes for Trump. I mean, maybe he'll wake up tomorrow. Maybe he'll look at my speech on YouTube, or if it's going out on YouTube, and get a plan for doing good. That's another thing. We must believe in Martin Luther King, that the arc of justice, or the arc of progress, or whatever he said, leads towards justice, and good will prevail over evil.
Just a quick update. For those of you that are not familiar, one of the best sources of documented information that's not covered by the mainstream media is this annual book that comes out from Censored News. It's out of Sonoma State University, Diablo Canyon, and several other colleges are contributing now. They sort through about 100 stories and call it down to the top 25 blacked out stories that would change America overnight if they were covered rather than blacked out. Project Censor has been up and running since 1976. It's one of the most prestigious journalism projects in the world. We have some confusion there.
Yeah, that should make it work.
Someone mentioned that one of the most important jobs we have is raising kids, and children should have rights to a decent life and a decent future. Well, what's not being reported, but is on the Want to Know info site and others, they're reporting that the numbers are coming in from all over the world. Compared to all other industrialized modern countries, American children are by far the sickest with the most chronic illnesses every year. In 1986 or so, when Anthony Fauci took over, the chronic illness rate among kids was 6%. Now the chronic illness rate with various things is 54%. The pharmaceutical industrial industry in America
Are
is
you a doctor?
they're developing lifelong customers. And so sick kids are a cash cow for our medical industrial complex because we have a for-profit medical system, not universal health care like they have in every other modern country. Every other modern country has universal health care. We have a for-profit care where a CEO was just killed, what, a month ago or something? And nobody is really talking about the message that the CEOs are sending to us. I was raised by parents that said actions speak louder than words. Well, what are the actions of these CEOs? They're saying, well, I'm sorry your kid is dying because you can't afford the medicine, but I need my billions. There's a tremendous amount of rage among people. Tom Hartman talked about this. There's about 1 million doctors in the country, but there's about 1.2 to 1.4 million CEOs and other people in the healthcare industry, insurance industry. Their job is to deny claims and make money by letting people die from lack of care. That's their job. So that guy, one guy murdered him. That's one murder. How many other people did he kill? How many people did he kill with his pen? Yeah, yell it out. Just yell it out. Get up.
Okay, I wanted to follow up on my idea that the biggest disaster to hit the United States is women's suffrage. Here are some of the things that have that are the case subsequent to women's suffrage. You can be a 15-year-old boy who can get statutorily raped, and the courts will order you to pay child support to the woman who gets pregnant and bears the child. Look it up. There are multiple cases of a minor child who is a male gets statutorily raped by a female in her 20s or 30s, and if she decides to have the kid, the court will order him to pay child support. That is absurd. Either he is not of sufficient maturity or agency to consent to sex, which means he can't also consent to child support, or he is. And of course, we've all decided that he is not. That's one absurdity. Another absurdity, you should look up Jeff Younger and an appearance on Temple in September 13th of 2023, maybe, and how he separated and divorced his wife, and his wife wants to put his...
Tell me how.
Then you've got the abortion incoherence, where the woman has 100% exclusive control. But if you have 100% exclusive control, you should have 100% exclusive responsibility, which means you cannot obligate the man to pay child support. You can't have somebody be responsible for something over which they have no control. Another one is the Duluth model of feminism or something like that. I remember listening to a podcast. You know, the idea that a man can be kicked out of his own home without being convicted in a court of law of committing a crime. Well, that's what happens when you have domestic violence calls with the cops. Cops will take the man out of the home without being convicted in a court of law. What if she's the one who was beating him? Women are violent too, and that goes unreported too much. False rape accusations. Believe all women. I don't think so. Women do false accusations all the time, and I think when it's proven that a woman has levied a false accusation, she should go to prison for the amount of time the man would have gone to prison for if he were actually convicted of the crime that she falsely accused him of. And then there's the idea of rape by fraud. I think I heard something in India where they were talking about if you misrepresent your social standing to a woman in order to secure sex from her, that can be considered rape by fraud. I'm actually not necessarily opposed to that. Because on the other hand, if I talk to a woman and I want to have sex with her and she says, oh, I'm totally on birth control, but she's not because she's lying to me, I think I've been raped if I have sex with her under the false pretenses that she's on birth control. Thank you.
Okay, Jake, you got a couple of minutes. Go ahead. Unmute, Jake.
Oh, take Aaron off. All right.
Jake,
Jake, unmute it.
unmute, Jake.
Okay, I just got a quick question for you. How does a woman rape a man? I've never heard of such a thing.
Just explained it.
Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna take a quick one and then we're gonna have our speaker.
Wait. I want an answer to my question. How does a woman rape a man? I'm asking the last speaker. How does a woman rape a man?
I explained it.
Hello?
So I explained it, so let me repeat myself. There's a concept called rape by fraud, where if you misrepresent something, and that's something is a deciding factor on whether somebody else consents to sexual contact with you. I heard this was something that happened in India where, you know, a man might say that he's, you know, like I don't know, whatever's prestigious, you know, presumably like a doctor or some kind of politician or something like that. But he's just some lower class, whatever. And she would never have had sex with him if she knew that he was that lower class kind of guy. He can be charged or, you know, accused of rape or something like that. Rape by fraud, rape by deception. So if rape by deception is legitimate, and I'm not necessarily saying it is, but I think there's something to it. If it is legitimate, then men can be raped in the sense that men can be, fraud can be committed against them by women who misrepresent themselves in order to secure sex from the man. So for example, if she says, hey, I'm on birth control, you don't have to worry about anything, but she's lying about it and she's not on birth control, and he only consents because he believes her when she says,
okay. I see what you mean. I see what you mean. That's not rape. It's fraud,
Jake,
but I don't consider it rape. Okay.
We don't need
All
to
right.
go down this rabbit hole.
Can I say something about that?
Go ahead, go
Okay,
ahead.
Okay, I just wanted to add something. I just want to add something to mention to Jake. I don't know about what the man who was just talking was talking about, but look, women actually have been convicted of raping males. One very famous case was that of Mary Kay Letourneau, who was a school teacher who I think she was in her 30s, and she had an affair with one of her students, a 12-year-old boy. Since he was below the age of consent, that counts as statutory rape. So that would be an example of that. Anyway, all right, that's all. That's all I want to say about it. All right.
Before we have Robert Holland to do his final rebuttal, I just want to remind all of you that we are, in a lot of cases, that this is probably still one of the best eras that we're living in as a species. Global life expectancy has significantly increased in the past century. In 1900, the average lifespan was around 30 years. Today, it's over 73 years. The improvement is largely due to advancements in medicine, sanitation, and nutrition. Reduced poverty. While poverty still exists, the proportion of global population living in extreme poverty has dramatically declined. In 1820, an estimated 85% of the world's population lived in extreme poverty. Today, that number is close to 10%. Decreased child mortality. Child mortality has plummeted, rates have plummeted worldwide. In the early 1900s, millions of children died before their 5th birthday. Thanks to vaccinations, improved healthcare, and better nutrition, child mortality rates have fallen significantly. Increased literacy. Global literacy rates have risen dramatically. In the 19th century, a large portion of the world's population was illiterate. Today, literacy rates are significantly higher, with over 86% of the global population able to read and write. Reduced violence. While conflict still occurs, the frequency and intensity of wars has declined in recent decades. Global homicide rates have fallen significantly since the 20th century. Anyway, that's some of the good things that have happened with this enlightenment. All right, Robert, let's go up and get your final rebuttal.
All right.
Thank you, everyone, for your remarks and your thoughts and your questions. My speeches tend to take the form of surveys, so I'm describing what I'm seeing. I don't generally offer advocacy in my speeches because I don't feel confident that I have the answers to things. Someone mentioned that the first step to solving a problem is identifying it and then identifying the solution. I call that solutionism. Solutionism is when you call into being out of thin air a solution, whether one exists or not. So if you're being treated for stage 4 terminal cancer, there's no solution for that. If global late stage capitalism is in decline and on a trajectory for failure, there's no solution for that. We have to respond to it, but that doesn't mean that there's a solution. The idea that we would embrace technology is a way of saying the only way through is forward, that we must use the tools of our own destruction to save ourselves. Well, that is a paradox, and I don't subscribe to the notion in the slightest. Nor do I believe that technology in and of itself in any way elevates the human condition. Now, the material conditions of life have indeed risen precipitously over the centuries, but we don't tend, unless we're reading off of a script provided from a Google search and then spit out by an AI assistant, we don't tend to compare ourselves to past centuries. We compare ourselves to our peers in our immediate environment, our time. So the human condition has a number of attributes. One of them is its finitude, which is another way of saying we have a foreknowledge of our own demise or our own death. I made mention of denial of the sacredness of death. Now, it was only a phrase embedded in the speech, but nobody picked up on that. Death is one of those things, the death of a civilization, the death of a loved one, our own deaths, need to be taken seriously. It's like a sacred object, even if you don't believe in the God, in short. And my sense is that it's being waved away. In the question answer, Chuck mentioned publishing and book sales being quite strong, but that's not what I spoke to. I spoke to the decline of literacy. So the idea of book sales and book publications, like fiat currency, being printed and spun out, doesn't matter if no one reads the books. The numbers on literacy having been in decline are legion. I don't have them in front of me. I didn't think it was within the scope of my speech. But we've all heard reports that many Americans don't read a single book in the course of a year. Not one. The point about the decline of literacy, for me, is summarized by Walter Ong in his book, Literacy and Orality, where he describes how we came out of a oral culture and became a literate culture, a people of the page, or people of type, if you will, with moving type, or movable type, that's the phrase. But my suggestion is that we're going back to an oral culture, but not based on speech, based on video. And the whole point is that it's removed, it's broadcasting, maybe it's on a Zoom call or something, but it lacks all of the human cues that we pick up innately and subconsciously when in actual dialogue with another person across the table or standing in a hallway somewhere. I was challenged about Trump derangement syndrome. Not a thing that a hill I'm willing to die on, let's put it that way. How do I know? What do I know? Am I a psychologist? Well, that's a gambit run against all of us that insists on credentials. The only people qualified to speak on something so obvious, so straight up in your face, is somebody with a credential. So I must admit, yes, I am a doctor. No, I am not a physician. Everyone else was introducing themselves that way earlier, so that was supposed to be a joke. Never mind. So the point of this is that for years, we could see the decline of the chief executive in real time. And we were told over and over and over again, there's nothing to see there, move along. All of us could see it, plain as day. And they finally admitted it, and now we're just supposed to shove that under the rug and forget it ever happened. This is one of the things that puzzles me, is that speaking about the reality principle, no one in any of the rebuttals or the questions seems to be at all concerned that reality has become a hologram. It's a fiction. It's a display. It's theater. It's all this projection out there into the world, lies and falsification, so that nobody knows how to interpret the world anymore. Nobody picked up on that, but that was the central thesis of one of the abandonments or reversals of the Enlightenment paradigm, which is rationality. No one picked up on that. The speaker's comments about suffrage and women's rights and feminism, I can't even. There were so many non sequiturs and loose assertions and just straight up misogyny. I can't even believe it. So let me point out that equality before the law, a very specific phrase that I used, is not the same as equity. Equity is equal outcomes. There's no such thing as equal outcomes, because some of us are taller, some of us are shorter, some of us have long hair, some of us have short hair, on and on and on. There are plenty of differences that guarantee differences in outcome. Yes, we have different roles to play, but if you jam women into a role, that's slavery? The fetishization of female reproductive capacity is one of the central themes of a novel by Margaret Atwood, The Handmaid's Tale, which has been made into a movie and made into a TV show. All of that is resurfacing again as we observe falling birth rates. People are seizing again on the idea that your job, if you're a woman, is to make babies. That is severely retrograde. I tried to avoid the political realm. I mentioned a few things just as orientation, but I will admit I do not subscribe to any of the traditional political words out there to identify myself as a liberal or a progressive or anything like that. I am a pacifist. I'm sick and tired of watching people being mistreated across the board for a whole variety of reasons. I think war is the worst possible thing on the planet. And yet, the United States is in the thick of it. And if we're not there doing it, we're using proxies to do it. Referring to the Department of Defense as the War Department is exactly the right thing. Definitions of pessimism that purportedly have no evidence is insane. Pessimists, according to psychological testing, have a closer adherence to reality than optimists. I've read that. I don't have anything to point to. Maybe you can find it yourself. But the reality principle should dictate a healthy skepticism and a healthy pessimism. That does not necessarily mean that you crawl in your hole and die today. We still got lives to lead. We still got things to contribute. There's still joy to be had. What I oppose is forced joy and forced optimism, which some people call hopium. The shutting off of the cell phones for me was just a metaphor. That's just the first thing that everybody's going to take notice of when the industrial machine seizes up and ceases to operate. Yes, there's going to be an entire giant collection of things that go wrong when all that happens, but it will be the phones turning off because we're so addicted to the information feed on our phones. That will be the thing that suddenly wakes people up that, oh no, we're in a new paradigm now. Now, it could be that it's industrial civilization that collapses, the production of energy becomes uneconomic, things that we can't stop, or it could be a Carrington event. I think that's the thing that was being referred to, what do they call it, a mass coronal ejection from the sun that fries all of the electronics and renders everything useless. If that occurs, we're back to 1850, before the creation of the electric grid. The last Carrington event in recorded human history was in the 1870s, I believe. 1859. Okay, somebody knows more than I do. It's one of those things like earthquakes, like solar flares, like meteors. It's bound to happen. We don't know when it will happen. Luckily, because the sun is a sphere and it has 360 degrees, if we're not within 1 or 2 degrees of that mass expulsion, then we'll probably luck out and not get hit. But if we are direct online, that's the end of electronics, folks. Citing de-evolution, I think, is an interesting concept, but evolution itself is a biological term, and it happens over evolutionary time. It's possible to speak of cultural evolution, use the term as a metaphor, and cultural evolution happens in the space of a lifetime, or even less, the space of a generation. So I'm okay with the use of evolution or de-evolution to describe how we have changed over from respecting the institutions that came out of the Enlightenment to attacking them. That was the main thrust. That's the title of the speech, the Counter Enlightenment. It follows from the idea of the Counter Reformation, which is a case of, well, you got what you wanted, but maybe it didn't turn out quite the way you hoped, and now you want to turn back the clock. We're there. It's happening. I have nothing else to say. Thank you very much tonight.
Okay.
All right. Folks, that's all for tonight, and thank you all for coming. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you and good